What is circulating today is not just a simple military rumor. It's an explosive story, a narrative which, if it gains traction in public opinion, could redefine the very perception of the war in Ukraine. Kyiv in panic. Hundreds of pilots are reported to have left the country and switched sides. True or false, this message is already a weapon. And tonight, we're going to analyze why.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clark Jackson. Before getting to the heart of the matter, allow me to wish you all a very Merry Christmas as the holidays approach. Now, let's get back to the news. Because what is circulating today goes far beyond classic military information. We are faced with a strategic narrative designed to make an impact in Kyiv, in Moscow, but especially in Washington and in Western capitals. Let's start with the facts, or more precisely, with the blurry line between established facts and narratives that take hold even before being verified. At this time, no independent official source, Western or international, confirms the existence of a mass desertion of Ukrainian pilots to Russia. No formal statement. No validated report. No corroborated figures. And yet, the narrative has already taken hold.
Why?
Because it follows a well-known mechanism of modern warfare, one where the speed of dissemination trumps the strength of the evidence. The initial sources of this claim come from unofficial channels, emotionally charged viral videos, and ideological relays that have a clear interest in projecting an image of internal collapse. This detail is fundamental. It doesn't automatically discredit the narrative, but it compels a cold, methodical, almost surgical analysis. Let's suppose for a moment that even a fraction of this narrative is exaggerated. The mere fact that it circulates so widely already has an impact. A psychological impact. A political impact. A strategic impact. In contemporary conflicts, information no longer follows events. It precedes them, sometimes even manufactures them. The message here is not primarily aimed at convincing military analysts. It targets public opinion, allies, decision-makers, and donors. It sows a corrosive question: is Ukrainian cohesion intact? And as soon as this question is posed, even without an answer, doubt begins to take root. This does not mean that the event is impossible. No serious analyst can claim that there are no defections, no discouragement, no individual rifts in such a long and grueling conflict. But moving from isolated cases, hypothetical or real, to a narrative of mass desertion is a strategic leap. And this leap is never innocent. It serves a specific purpose: to create the impression of a tipping point. The real question, therefore, isn't simply whether this story is true or false. The real question is more unsettling: why this story now? Why this emphasis on the word panic? Why target pilots specifically, symbols of skill, rarity, and technological superiority? Every word is chosen. Every image is calculated. And while evidence is still lacking, the effect is already beginning to be felt. So, should we dismiss this narrative out of hand?
No.
Should we swallow it whole? Certainly not. We must treat it for what it is at this stage: a narrative weapon launched into a saturated information space, designed to act before reality has even had time to respond. And the question that arises, almost naturally, is this: who benefits most from this instilled doubt, and how far can this doubt go? Why pilots? The question is not trivial. It is, in fact, central. A pilot is never just another soldier. They are not interchangeable personnel. They represent strategic capital, trained over years, rigorously selected, and skilled in operating complex systems, often irreplaceable in the short term. To tamper with the image of the pilot is to tamper with the very heart of modern military capability. And every general staff understands this perfectly. To suggest that pilots are fleeing isn't simply a matter of telling a story of desertion. It's implying that the elite are wavering. That those who see the battlefield from the sky, with a comprehensive, tactical, almost clinical vision, have lost faith. The message is stark: if even they are leaving, what's left? This logic is relentless, even when based on assumptions. It acts like a slow poison on the collective consciousness. From a purely military standpoint, the loss of pilots isn't measured solely in personnel numbers. It's measured in power projection capabilities, deterrence, and airspace control. Training a fighter pilot isn't done in a few months. It requires time, infrastructure, instructors, aircraft, and substantial budgets. Let's suppose, even briefly, that this narrative takes hold. The adversary no longer even needs to demonstrate material superiority. The mere idea of internal collapse is enough to weaken the entire structure. But the most desired effect is not military. It is psychological. This narrative targets morale, confidence, and national cohesion. It is addressed to soldiers on the ground, technicians, mid-level officers, but also to civilians. It whispers a dangerous question: if those who are best trained have doubts, why continue? And once this question takes root, it becomes difficult to neutralize. This strategy isn't new, but it has been refined. It relies on information overload. The same message, repeated, declined, and amplified, eventually creates a sense of inevitability. It doesn't matter if the facts are incomplete. It doesn't matter if the figures are unverified. What matters is the impression of a breaking point. And this impression acts as a multiplier of stress, fatigue, and internal suspicion. This narrative must therefore be understood for what it truly is: an attempt at mental disorganization. An operation aimed at eroding trust even before breaching the front lines. Because in contemporary warfare, the most decisive battle is not always fought with missiles or tanks. It is fought in the minds of men. And the question that arises, almost silently, is this: how far can this psychological pressure go before producing real consequences? In Washington, a story like this doesn't provoke impulsive reactions or hasty pronouncements. It doesn't trigger visible panic. But it activates something far more important: silent red flags, the kind only strategic circles know how to read. In the hushed offices of American power, this sort of message is dissected, turned over, and put into perspective. Not for what it asserts, but for what it suggests. The first question that arises is direct: are there real, even marginal, internal cracks within the Ukrainian military apparatus? Not a complete rupture, but faint signals, doubts, tensions, individual lapses. Because in American analyses, collapses never begin with spectacular falls. They begin with microfractures ignored for too long. And this kind of narrative forces us to look at these gray areas with renewed attention. The second question is even more uncomfortable: is massive and prolonged Western support producing moral fatigue in Ukraine? A protracted war wears down nerves, erodes certainties, and weakens even the strongest alliances. Let's suppose this narrative resonates, even partially, with Ukrainian public opinion. The impact would not be merely military. It would be political. It would call into question the capacity to endure, to absorb the human, economic, and social costs of a conflict that has become structural. The third question is perhaps the most sensitive: can this narrative influence Western public opinion as key political deadlines approach? In the United States, each election cycle transforms foreign policy into an arena for domestic debate. The slightest doubt about the effectiveness or viability of support for Kyiv becomes rhetorical ammunition. The defection narrative, therefore, is not aimed solely at Ukraine. It is also aimed at voters, parliamentarians, and budget decision-makers. And this is where doubt becomes strategic. Even without proof, it acts as leverage. It slows down certain decisions. It complicates certain votes. It introduces hesitation where continuity was previously the norm. Moscow knows this perfectly well. Russia doesn't need to convince everyone. It only needs to fragment certainty, erode consistency, and transform a clear line into a permanent debate. In this American geopolitical reading, the narrative is not assessed as an isolated piece of information, but as a piece on a much larger chessboard. A piece intended to test the political, psychological, and electoral resistance of the West. And the question that arises, almost automatically, is this: to what extent can this doubt reshape future strategic decisions, long before military reality intervenes? In conclusion, this title should never be read as a raw, fixed, definitively established fact. It should be read as a strategic signal, a marker of the current state of the global confrontation. A signal indicating that war is no longer confined to front lines, military maps, or daily reports. It is now being waged in the information space, where perception precedes action and narrative shapes decision-making. This signal tells us one essential thing: the information war has intensified to an unprecedented level. Every word is weighed, every figure is amplified, every image is exploited to produce maximum impact. It's no longer just about convincing, but about saturating, exhausting, and disorienting. The battle of narrative has become as decisive as the battle on the ground, sometimes even more swift in its consequences. This signal then reveals a fierce struggle to impose the idea of the other side's imminent collapse. This is not a historical novelty, but the level of sophistication has changed. Today, it's no longer about proclaiming victory. It's about establishing the idea that the opposing side's defeat is inevitable, already underway, practically a done deal. Once this idea is entrenched, every event, every silence, every delay is interpreted as confirmation. The narrative becomes self-reinforcing. Now suppose this narrative takes hold permanently. The consequences would extend far beyond the military sphere. They would affect the confidence of allies, the resolve of public opinion, and the stability of political decisions. A long war is not won with weapons alone. It is won with psychological endurance. And it is precisely this endurance that this type of message seeks to undermine. The real question, therefore, is not simply whether these defections occurred. This question, however legitimate, is almost secondary at this stage. The most disturbing question lies elsewhere. Who benefits from our believing them, and why now? Why does this narrative emerge at this precise moment in the conflict? Why does it target a specific military elite? Why does it adopt a tone of urgency and panic? Staying vigilant then becomes a strategic act in itself. Because in this conflict, what you are led to believe can sometimes be as decisive as what is actually happening on the battlefield. And the final question, the one that must remain open, is perhaps the simplest and the most worrying. Are we witnessing information, or a maneuver designed to precede the next phase of the conflict?